Jesus to rightfully represent himself to you tonight. Don't hear it from me, man. Let Jesus tell you, because this song is the truth of who Jesus did. It literally came right from the Bible. Luke 15, this is who Jesus is. He's pursuing you. He loves you deeply. He cares about every single thing you're going through. And he wants everything. He died for everything.
Our second week that our team spent was in Croswell, Michigan, a really small town in the thumb of Michigan with about 2,000 people that live there. And our heart that we felt for this city was that we are going to empower the next generation to live a life sold out for Jesus while serving the generation that's come before us. So our week was spent serving a lot at The Rock, which was a youth ministry tied to Croswell Wesleyan Church. And one of the biggest testimonies that came through this week was rooted in the revelation that the Lord orders our steps, that no matter whether we see him working or not, that the way that he orders our steps is so divine. And this happened with a young man named Clay. And throughout this week, we've been playing basketball with the different students and all this kind of stuff. And one day our schedule got shifted around a little bit, and we were supposed to be at the basketball court at 4, but instead we went at 2. And so 4 o'clock, we arrived back to The Rock, the student center, and Clay walked in the building. Just full of brokenness and just like need for hope. And in that moment, Clay opened up to us that Clay is actually transitioned from a female to a male. And in the last 6 months, he's been taking testosterone shots. And he has to take them in his backside. And one day he took a testosterone shot and it hit one of his nerves and he fell straight on the floor. And in this moment, Clay was getting like pictures and images and the vision of hell, people screaming for him and fire and just people grabbing his legs, trying to pull him in. And he snapped awake and he was like, wow, I got to get right with God. And he heard about this young, crazy, college age group that was at The Rock. So he just instantly went there and he met us. He met our team. And in that moment, we got to just sit down with Clay. And through this process, we just got to speak to identity and what society has told Clay that his identity is and all of this different stuff. And we got to give him the revelation that being anything other than a child of God, that identity comes second. And we have to put that identity back on the throne. And through this process, Clay was able to rededicate his life to Christ. And while we were praying for him, we were just laying hands and all this kind of stuff. And as we were praying, Sarah lifted her hand off and put it back on. And through the process of that, we were done praying, and Clay goes, "Thank you to whoever gave me a back adjustment." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "My back hurt, and I had one of my part of my spine was out of place, but while we were praying, I felt it snap back in." And we were like, "Clay, the Lord just healed you." So through this process of just one encounter of the Lord ordering our steps, we saw a young individual get to know that they're a child of the Most High King, get set free from any type of identity crisis, as well as be healed and rededicate their life back to the Lord.
Week 2, Nashville, Tennessee / Normandy, Tennessee. When we got to Nashville, all of our plans fell through. It's pretty wild because we're always saying things like, "God, you can wreck my plans. Holy Spirit, I want to be fully dependent on you." But something happens when God actually cashes in on his words. And we saw everything get flipped upside down right away. We come into Nashville and we feel the darkness. We see the partying, the desperation for any kind of hope. And we get to worship on a bridge downtown in Nashville several times, and we're seeing that worship is actually pushing back the darkness. But meanwhile, we were actually staying in a host home a little over an hour away in this place called Normandy, Tennessee, a population of only 100 people. And we're sitting there and it feels dark. You can feel the spirit of death. You can feel the grief over this small town. And we realized that the Lord actually had a plan for this small town. And so what we decided to do was throw a bonfire and go house to house, door to door, meet the entire town, offer to pray over people, get to know them, and invite them to the bonfire. In the midst of this, we figured out that actually there was only 3 churches in this whole town. They didn't get along with each other. And 2 years prior, one of the pastors actually committed suicide. And 2 months before we got there, someone else in the town had committed suicide. And as we went to door, every person had a story of how they were grieving, and we got to pray with them and see that joy truly does come from mourning when we give it to Jesus. the most significant story in the midst of that is we met a man named CJ. CJ came out, and we find out his father was actually the man who committed suicide 2 months prior, and he himself had walked in as it was happening. He was struggling with PTSD, anxiety, and drug addiction. In the midst of that, we invited him to our bonfire. He opened up to us, said he trusted us, asked us all to pray over him, and as we were praying over him, these things began to lift and leave him. Suddenly, we began to speak things that only God knew about him, and he kept going, I never told you that, I never told you that. Jesus knows these things. And as he looked up, he was completely different, and he said he was filled with joy. We come to find out that actually when we had knocked on his door, he was on the phone with a friend telling him, I don't know how much longer I'm gonna make it, thinking and contemplating about suicide himself. But God intervened. He was so filled with joy, he said, we have to go bring this back to my mother. And we got to go into his house, speak to his mom and pray with her and see joy fill her as well.
So in week 2, we were in Detroit, Michigan, serving on the Kairos farm with a family that's been doing work on this farm for their community for the past about year. And it was so awesome. This family is so amazing. And we were just able to be the hands and feet of Jesus to them and serve them in a time of need this week, while also being able to partner with Brendan's team during the night. And we would go out and do worship nights and just ministry nights with them. And so we were at the farm from about like 9 to about 4. And we'd drive an hour to Detroit and be doing these worship nights to really see East Michigan set on fire for the gospel and for Jesus, really displaying the power of the gospel, the simple gospel, and really going after activation. And one of these nights on Friday night, we were at a Filipino International Baptist Church in a small town in Michigan, in southeastern Michigan, where my housemate Nye actually grew up and is from. And she was so fired up, so passionate about just seeing her church awakened to the reality of who Jesus is. And so it was really awesome. So we went in there and we were starting to do this worship night and really felt like the Lord wasn't really asking us anything specific, but then Nye comes up, grabs the microphone, just starts preaching the gospel, preaching the love of Christ that has set them free, that set her free this past year. And in that freedom, she invited families to pray for each other, get vulnerable, get real with one another about what's been going wrong in their families. And people are just crying at the weight of love of the Lord that's in them, and at the vulnerability of their brothers and sisters. And we got to see this whole church just breathe a fresh breath of awakening, and we got to see Nye come alive and be activated, and she's been leading her friends to Christ for the rest of this summer, and it's been absolutely mind-blowing. And so the heart for Detroit was really just to see people ignited and activated and just commissioned to be where they're at, to be missionaries where they're at, and see the gospel change the whole world around them.
What's up, guys? This is week 2 of the Everyheart tour, and my team got to be in Jackson, Michigan, a small town where several of us grew up. And we really believe for this city that there has been addictions that have been put in front of Jesus. There's been things that people have been trying to fill their hearts with, and we really stepped into seeing God's heart that He wants to remove those and replace it with the love that He has for every person in this city. We got to partner with an amazing homeless shelter. We got to partner with several churches and a few different organizations that are seeking to benefit and grow Jackson in the positive way. And what we just realized is people are so hungry to identify with something greater than themselves. That's what they're looking for. And the addictions, the broken relationships, everything that we found to be true of the city was just a supplement for what they're actually looking for, which was a relationship with Jesus. And people were so hungry when the truth was presented, they were hungry for it. Some testimonies, the altar call moment at our gathering was so powerful as we saw 15 to 20 people come to the front on their knees, ready to accept and surrender their lives to the God who loves them. We saw a storm literally split. There was a 100% chance of rain for our gathering, and we literally saw the storm split so that we can worship in this space. There was a man named Troy who was walking by struggling with addiction, gave his life to Jesus, and countless other seeds and salvations happening from that week. God is so powerful, He's so good, and He's got so much for the city of Jackson.
So week 2 we were in Detroit, Michigan, and right away we were just hit with God's heart for the city, and just that He hates injustice. We were doing some Google searches, and we found that Detroit is the #1 most dangerous city in the US at the moment, and there's just so much hurt and violence and brokenness. We met a 16-year-old boy that week who someone from the church had been pouring into, and he's just stuck in such a broken situation in his home. His mom is abusive and alcoholic, and so he can either live with her or choose to live with his cousin who sells drugs and run the streets. And we were just so heartbroken by this, but we found that it was the narrative of so many people living in that city. Yeah, our hearts were just breaking for that, and it just kind of downloaded a burden to see the lost and the hopeless like meet the love of Jesus, and that burden kind of just like carried on for the rest of the summer. But throughout the week we got to partner with 3 different churches, and I have to say they're probably some of my favorite ministries we partnered with all summer because of the pastors of the churches. They were so raw and so real, and their hearts were just so heavy to see those in the city like met by and encountered by the real Jesus, and they didn't care about, you know, getting more members in their church or about religion. Like it was just about Jesus and his love. So we had the honor to lead worship at a bunch of their church services throughout the week. At the end of the week, one of the pastors said to us before we left, he said, "If the only reason you guys came was to encourage me, then you succeeded." And in reality, I think that like we were more encouraged by them than they were by us, and just their persistence and passion to see revival in the darkest places of the U.S. And it just brought a lot of hope and inspiration to our team to see like what God is going to do in that city. At the end of the week at our gathering, we saw almost 200 people just gather together in one of the darkest places in this city and just worship. And we saw a lot of people rededicate their lives to Jesus, and so many more people just catch a burden to see revival in their city.